Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is Chapter 8 in our series entitled Shards of the Moon. And after the last chapter's cliffhanger ending, this one's straight into the action. I hope you guys enjoy it. Please do let me know down below in the comments. Please do like and share. Let's get straight into that. Chapter 8, Shards of the Moon. He could feel something stirring, some kind of electric pain in his core. As his very soul was becoming unquiet, the cold third night since the massacre, the dozens of bodies still being sorted, the tags being collected, a sudden hit his chest that felt like he had been hit by a grenade. All of the wind was knocked out of his lungs, and his brain suddenly lit up with the pain, the shock and the blast of adrenaline into his veins, but not most of all, the panic. His lungs would not unblock. His head was quickly beginning to throb as every inch of his body felt as if it was catching fire. The sheer panic that he would die. It was like a heart attack almost. His body's function suddenly ceasing and refusing to let go. It was horrific and almost indescribable. And just before the changes started to set in, that night all those years ago, that first incarnation of what he had become, what his life had been stricken with, in order for a fate to continue his undeserved punishment. It was all he could think about, and all of that drove him to work and work to a perfect system of suppression. But now, standing here in this terrible position, that time was on him again. He was hunched behind a self-proclaimed worker of God, with a gun to his head, the shallow shield separating a hail of bullets from coming his way. The situation was only growing more and more desperate, and suddenly very dangerous. A plan, if he could call it that at this point. It seemed more like making it up as he went along, but it just might work if he can play it just right. Just then, the beeping of his watch continued for another few more moments, before finally stopping. It was close. He could feel that stirring of his soul, that strange crawling deep down inside, as his body was preparing itself for what is, or what was, about to undergo. It was a grotesque sensation, as if one could feel their insides crawling about, writhing, nauseating. Then it came. Just as soon as he had expected it, the sudden blast against his heart, the pain sending his body into a quick convulsion before his arm tightened around Cohen's neck and pulling him back with renewed vigour. Cohen revamped his fight against the grip, nearly choking him, but Rhada was unable to let go, even if he had wanted to. Until that original pain was subside, he knew well how everything would play, but he only hoped he could resolve everything before it got too far. With a loud cough and a sudden gasp for air, Rhada's lungs unlocked. His head was throbbing with pain, but his strength held out, letting him maintain his composure for the most part, and his prisoner. You have about 1 minute to decide until I kill you. Your congregation and everything else out of a 5-mile radius. Go! Rhada forced himself to vocalise, his body shaking violently with the pain beginning to rack it. Cohen watched the obscene show of twisted nature as the arm that had been wrapped around his neck was now changing before his very eyes. Fingers elongating, knuckles swelling and cracking as shape was changing. He really was one of the monsters, and he really was toe to toe with it. With a short hesitation, he spoke very calmly, very coolly. He maintained his demeanour even in the face of this abomination. Let it go. We needn't all meet the Lord this eve. We'll catch him another time, Cohen said, as if passing off the chance as easily as he had taken it. With that, 2 men restraining Madison released her, and she, with great haste, moved away from the men and towards the quickly changing Rhada. His voice almost wasn't his own anymore. He was grunting and growling to fend off the pain. But just watching his face, she could see his brow line changing. his lips shifting as glistening ivory was beginning to push down. With his eyes now shining yellow, he signalled her to pass by as he slowly retreated with Cohen in tow. "That's the difference between you and me, Cohen. I don't kill men. I kill monsters," Rhada said to Cohen, but his voice was still suffering the growls as his vocals continued to shift. "But you're blurring the line." With that, Rhada pulled his pistol back from Cohen's forehead and brought it down with a swift bash across the side of his head, sending him reeling to the ground. But Rhada, faced with so much ordnance, would not give up only his protection so easily. He spun on his heel before Cohen had even hit the ground, and out of his battered coat came a trump card. A small, steel cylinder of pure human anguish that this world had completely forgotten about. One that was likely very few left in this world, even. It tumbled through the air in its throw, almost in slow motion, towards the men and their still aimed firearms, but all looked to this thing, eyes tracking its arch towards them, then its bounce along the ground. Rhada had managed in that time to grab a hold of Madison and bring her down with himself, his hands covering his ears. A sudden blast of light, wind and noise, like one of Zeus' lightning bolts bottled and set free in this mortal world. And just as soon as the strike was done, Rhada and Madison ran. But Rhada could hardly run. He quickly dug into his pocket to retrieve one of his injections, but his hands, they would hardly seem to operate it. He could hardly grasp it at this point. His breathing was laboured. He was obviously in pain, and as one malformed had sunk the plunger into his thigh, the other was holding his pistol, offering it to the concerned Madison, who would not take it. "Please, take it, take it!" Rhada pleaded, his teeth gritting as he could hardly form cohesive words anymore around the ivory in his mouth. He came to that familiar coolness, that soothing balm of everything. Even against the intense pain all throughout him, the burn of this liquid was far, far cooler. "But no, you'll be all right. It's fine." Madison started, not taking the pistol. It won't stop. Only slow it. Please, take it." He ended up nearly roaring as his body kicked and thrashed. A boot discarded from a kicked leg showing that his right foot was very much not human anymore. It was longer and thicker, continuing to change shape, albeit much, much slower. What can I do? What can we do?" Madison asked with tears forming in her eyes. She knew that nowhere nearby could be safe, especially at this time of night, so close to those once good men, especially with Rhada well on the road to not being human anymore. What could they do? Safe as Rhada tried to spit out his words, but as he began to pick himself up, leaning against whatever he could as his uneven legs carried him down the ruined sidewalk. What's safe?" Madison asked in a panic. This could be important. What was he trying to say? With a grunt, Rhada signalled her to follow, picking up the pace to a limping jog as they made their way down deeper into the city. The light was all but gone at this point, and the sun was set and bright and full. Moon was out, and each step that Rhada took, it seemed more and more difficult for him to keep going. Every time she looked at him, she saw less and less human walking with her, and more of an imbalanced, hulking creature. It was absolutely terrifying, but even more so to see this happening right in front of her. Rhada, though, seemed to be making his way with a little more speed towards a building with a heavy-looking steel gate guarding its front doors. It was plain, but dilapidated sign on its curb said "Bank of" something or other. Rhada grunted in pain and held onto the steel gate with his malformed hands as he panted in wheezing, laboured breaths. At this point, she couldn't tell what was more horrid, the fact that he was changing against his will, or the fact that he was happening so slowly. It must have compounded everything, drawn out every little detail. The thick hair had begun to sprout on his exposed arms and backs of his hands, along with his neckline, along with his tuft of especially long hair seeming to come out the back from above his waistband. Safe house. Rhada growled. It wasn't even his voice anymore. There was less and less of him by the second. Safe house! Okay, we've got to get this open, come on, Madison exclaimed, before grabbing hold of the bar at the bottom. It wasn't latched or locked, but it only seemed to move about an inch upward before it got stuck. No matter how much her light frame tried to pull and strain at the heavy gate, she couldn't seem to pick it up. Were they that close? Were they going to be that short? Come on, she cried as she yanked at the door so hard it made her hands hurt, but it still would not budge. Just as she had said that, though, she saw the body that was once Rhada move down from the grate and scoop its hands beneath that inch that she had freed. Then, what she saw next would be quite a bit of nightmare fuel for the future. That was for sure. She watched as Rhada pulled up at the grate and with a grunt of effort bringing it to and past that 1 inch of play with a jerk. But as he exerted himself, so did its changes. As he lifted, his body began to bulk and stretch. His other foot burst his boot apart, long claws scraping the sidewalk as he fell to one knee, then recovered as he continued to push. Rips tore through the outer seam of his pants, with dark grey fur bursting out behind them. His jacket stained before finally bursting itself against the growing frame as he picked up the grate about halfway before collapsing inward into the building onto his front with a yelp of pain. Madison quickly made her way in and tried to grab hold of him and bring him aside as he crawled and tried to stand, but nothing was working right. His own body was so foreign to him right now that he felt as if he were being pulled by invisible marionette strings. Come on, Rhada, we got to. Oh God, come on, you're heavy. Come on. Up, soldier, we've got to go, she said as she tried to force him up. Unfortunately, he found his feet just enough to do that. As Rhada finally was able to stand up again, his breathing was beginning to improve, but his voice was completely gone. It was only raspy growls and the sound of immense lungs filling as he did. She also took in shock that even though he was a fair bit taller than her before, now he towered over her, and most things in the cleared building, the only thing really left that would be walking to was a big, heavy-looking steel door in the next room. Rhada nearly ran when he saw it, and without words he made his way into it, pulling the door behind him. Just as he was closing it from the inside, its hinges squeaking quietly from the weight of the immense steel door, he saw her one last time for the night from the dim light in the building. She could only see a pair of glowing yellow eyes and an unfamiliar, inhuman face looking back at her, but she knew that in that moment he was still there, just for that last moment. The door closed with a quiet thud and a quiet machine sound of something beginning to move along its edges. Bars slid out into the floor and the ceiling, thick metal bars. As a small screen on the wall beeped to life quietly, Madison slowly approached the panel, watching it. It looked familiar. Familiar handiwork had been applied to it. Below, the panel had been popped open, and wires led out of it, small digital timers. And down to a large battery of some kind, the timer had the words, "Good Chef Inc." on it in stylized letters, and it seemed to be counting down from 12 hours. She made her way back to the steel grate to close it and keep her house safe, and was able to easily push it back down to fully closed, despite the groan of metal as she did. Just as she had done that, though, she heard a horrid sound. It was Rhada, his new voice anyway, roaring out, calling out loudly. Even beyond this heavy door, she could hear him roaring. She could hear thrashing inside the room, maybe tables being overturned. Some kind of noise, for sure. Then, a sudden bang against the door itself. It was loud and inhumanly powerful, making her jump. Another hard bang against the wall, and various pictures on the wall shaking gently on their hangings from the force. Bang! Things continued to shake. Bang! A picture fell from the hanging on the wall. Bang! One of the steel bars in the roof moved. Bang! The loud clang of metal as the door tried to stay shut. But it wasn't holding him back. Madison, in a panic, turned back to the grate and began trying to pull it up again. But again, she couldn't make it past that 1 inch. Another loud bang, and even she yelled out in fear, pulling at it again. Finally, it started to budge. She could hear metal groaning in protest to her actions, and Rhada's sheer force, but she had to get out. She had to. Then, suddenly, a very loud roar this time. It was so loud that it shook the air. She knew he was free, and her head had instinctively turned to face him. All she saw was a sudden rush of black and a flash of white teeth. Wow, I hope you guys are enjoying this series as much as I am. Thank you ever so much for your comments. I love going through them all. Please do like and share, of course, guys. Really do appreciate your support. Remember, folks, be safe, not sorry.